welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Leandra, the TBR0, and I have a massive Agatha Christie book haul for you today. Oh my gosh, these are so heavy. I'm gonna put them down. You heard it right, Leandra the TBR0 has a book haul. However, just so everybody knows that this book haul is actually more so out of pure luck than anything else. I didn't spend any money on the 23 books that I'm hauling, and they all happen to be Agatha Christie Bantam classics published during the 80s. Apparently a patron at the library where I work, she came in one Saturday with a full box of these pristine condition editions, and she just decided that she didn't want them in her home anymore. She wanted to give them to the library, see if we could do anything with them. And the assistant director immediately thought of me, and so she saved the box, ended up kind of distributing a couple of the editions to people interested. Like, she ended up taking Murder on the Orient Express, and another coworker who wanted to try Agatha Christie for the first time ended up grabbing And Then There Were None. So those two editions are ones I don't have, unfortunately, but that's okay. I am definitely not in any way going to complain about getting 23 other Agatha Christie books, and they kind of range across Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, Tommy and Tuppence, and then a couple of standalones that don't affiliate with any of her main detectives. So I'm going to try and go through them today. I've organized them based on the detective, who is the primary focus of each book. And yeah, I'm going to kind of cover whether I already own an edition of this copy, if I've already read it before. But honestly, most of the ones I collected were ones I didn't own and I never read before. So I'm really excited. This is honestly just makes me over the moon. Alright, so starting off with Tommy and Tuppence, I ended up getting 3 books in their series, and I have read 2 out of the 3 of them. They are such a fun sleuthing couple. I think oftentimes when we're talking about Agatha Christie, we only focus on Poirot and Marple, but Tommy and Tuppence add a really fun texture to Agatha Christie's canon. They're both young sleuths, they're in love, so there's a bit of a side romance going on, and they just have a lot of fun with this sleuthing process. There's touches of espionage, there's also a collection, one of the 3 that I have, where each story is an homage to a well-known fictional detective, where they kind of try to impersonate these detectives and see if investigations can be fruitful that way. And it's a really great time. And so one of the ones I have is actually The Secret Adversary. This one was published back in 1922, and it is the first book that focuses on these 2 characters. We also have Partners in Crime. This one is the collection of stories that I mentioned. It's the second book that follows these characters. And then finally, we jump quite a few decades, and I ended up getting By the Pricking of My Thumbs. This one was published, I think, in 1968. So both of these books were from the 20s, and then about 40 years later, we have By the Pricking of My Thumbs. There are a couple more books in this series that I just didn't get in the Bantam edition, which is totally fine, but it kind of lends to a really interesting topic where Poirot and Marple, they never age. Realistically, by the end of their careers, they both should be in their 100s, whereas Tommy and Tuppence, they start off their career as young, early 20s detectives, and by the time we get to By the Pricking of Their Thumbs, they are middle-aged or older. I think, from what my understanding is, I haven't read, this is one of the 3 that I haven't read that I'm owning now. I'm pretty sure she actually has them age appropriately, which is so fascinating and interesting. And yeah, if you haven't read anything by Tommy and Tuppence, I highly recommend that you do, because we end up focusing on Poirot and Marple too much, and Tommy and Tuppence are just a ball. They are so fun. Moving on to the next detective, we have Miss Marple. I ended up getting 5 editions, which I'm so excited about, especially because I think, in a different way from Tommy and Tuppence, Marple is another sleuth that just doesn't get the credit she deserves. She's an old spinster sleuth, being a woman who was childless, never married, and she ends up overcoming so many different obstacles as she's solving crime as an older woman in society, and I love it so much. That's why I ended up doing my master's thesis on her. But so going from the bottom to the top, we have The Murder at the Vicarage. This was published in 1930. This was her first Miss Marple book ever, and honestly, it has a really special place in my heart. I absolutely love it. Moving forward, we have Murder with Mirrors. You might not recognize that title. It's because it's also been published under They Do It with Mirrors, and this came out in 1952. So again, a jump of like 22 years between these editions. That in no way means that there weren't other Miss Marples between there. This is just the Bantam editions I got. And then we have What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. Again, you might not recognize it. It's actually also been published under 450 from Paddington, and I have read this one, as well as Murder at the Vicarage. These are the two, actually, I've read 3 in this collection, and one of them I actually hate. So we'll get to that in a second. So with What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw, that came out in 1957, I believe. Then we have The Mirror Cracked, and that came out in 62. And finally, we have Nemesis, and that was published in 1971. Which is kind of crazy to think that, again, we have demonstrating here, as with Tommy and Tuppence, a 40-year gap between books. And with Miss Marple, I think you feel the age especially, and I can say that from personal experience. I have read Murder at the Vicarage. I then read 450 from Paddington, or What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw, and then I also read Nemesis. Oh my gosh, Nemesis is horrible. It's honestly terrible. I would never recommend anyone read that, especially if they want to try Agatha Christie for the first time. Save this when you're willing to be a bit more critical of her and that you already kind of know her more successful, better books. And just because the mystery is really weak, a lot of times when we're talking about Agatha Christie, we acknowledge the fact that her older mysteries just aren't up to snuff compared to the ones that she wrote when she was younger. Nemesis, the mystery is really weak here. It also is a bit problematic. A lot of the viewpoints that Miss Marple demonstrates and a few other characters are just kind of horrendous. You wouldn't want to be affiliated with someone who has these views, especially in regards to consent, blaming the victim, these types of issues. And so I definitely don't recommend this. And the only reason why I'm excited to have a Bantam edition is because I in no way was ever going to buy a copy of this particular title. And so now that I have it in Bantam, I'm like, oh great, now I never have to worry about not owning all of Agatha Christie's books if I ever wanted to, because this was free. Okay, we're definitely gonna have to do Poirot in 2 or 3 stacks because I have a lot of his. So with Poirot, he's the one that I definitely got the most copies of, and it makes sense because proportionally he's the one that has the most books about him. And yeah, so just that makes sense there. He's super popular. Basically, the public was demanding that Agatha Christie never let this character die, and so she just didn't. But we're going to start off with this stack of 4. We have The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, a very controversial book. So if you're ever interested in reading this, I highly recommend you go in blind, because half of the people love the ending, half of the fans don't love the ending. I'm in the group that actually loves it. I love how Agatha Christie just challenges the genre, challenges certain tropes and expectations, and breaks the rules as much as she bends them. And I really loved this book. So if you also loved it, I'd love to see your own thoughts in the comments. Or likewise, if you actually are among those who weren't happy with it, I'd love to know. So that was published in 1926. It was definitely not her first book ever. Her first book was definitely a Poirot one. It was The Mysterious Affair at Styles, and that one was published in 1920. So you can see this was published 6 years after Hercule Poirot was established. Then we have The ABC Murders. This one actually is the return of Hastings. Originally, she tried to send him off to Argentina, got him married and everything, because she didn't really want to follow the whole Sherlock Holmes-Watson dynamic like she did when she first created the duo. But naturally, she had to bring him back, and so he comes back in The ABC Murders. And that one's a bit of a thriller. It's a bit of a suspense. It's quite fun, and that was published 10 years later, so 1936. Then we have Poirot Loses a Client. This is yet another book that has a different well-known title, and it's Dumb Witness. Came out a year later, 1937. And then we have Sad Cypress. Honestly, one of my now newly favorite Agatha Christie books. I read it back in January for the first time. Absolutely adored it. And that one came in 1939. So in this stack, I read 3 out of the 4 books. I've read Murder of Roger Ackroyd, The ABC Murders, and Sad Cypress. So those were from the 20s and 30s. We're completely skipping the 40s as we move into the next stack because we start off with Funerals Are Fatal, another title that has been Americanized after The Funeral is the original title, and that came out back in 53. And then we have Cat Among the Pigeons, came out in 59, and then Halloween Party came out in 1969. So again, this gives you a great perspective of just the range of Agatha Christie's career. Her first ever book was 1920, and now we have Halloween Party at 1969. Nemesis was back in 1971. We have By the Pricking of My Thumbs, 1968. So she was continuing all of these series decades and decades later, which is just really interesting. And among these three, I actually haven't read any of them. So it's really exciting when you gain for free a bunch of books that you've never even read. And yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this. And then finally, we have 4 more books that follow Hercule Poirot. These 2 bring us into the 70s though. We have Elephants Can Remember, that was from 1972, I believe. And then we have Curtain, Hercule Poirot's Final Case, from 1975. Agatha Christie ended up passing away in 1976, if I recall. So she was writing up until her death, which is just, honestly, it kind of is mind-blowing. And then I also ended up snagging 2 short story collections. So Poirot Investigates, that one, let me see here, I have it written down. That one originally came out in 1924. So that was, again, one of her earliest books, which is just really exciting because I will say that I am way more familiar with her novels than I am with any of her short-length works. And then The Labors of Hercule Poirot, or The Labors of Hercules, actually, that one is from 1947. So it's really, that's the only book, I think, as far as Poirot goes, that I have from the 40s in a Bantam edition. So yeah, crazy. And the last 4 of my 23 book haul was a collection of standalones. So these aren't affiliated with any really well-known detectives. And I have to say that that's probably the area that I am the least familiar with as far as Agatha Christie goes. We have Murder at Hazelmoor. I had never heard of this. I was like, what is this book? And then I realized that it's actually the Sitterford mystery. It obviously has a different title in the US, but I had no idea. And then we have Why Didn't They Ask Evans? That's from 1933. I'm really excited to read this because I know that the BBC recently remade this as an adaptation, and I really want to watch it. But of course, I want to read it first. We also have Death Comes at the End. This was from 1944. Another book from 1944 was Remembered Death. And again, I had to do some Google searching to understand what this title was because the list that I have, I've created my own master list, didn't have this listed, and I was like, what is this book? And I realized it's Sparkling Cyanide. Isn't that crazy? As someone who would like to think I know a good amount of information about Agatha Christie and her titles, I was so amazed by the number of books that had alternate titles that I didn't even realize were slightly altered, or as far as Murder at Hazelmoor and Remembered Death goes, completely different titles. That's just, it makes you wonder about the publishing industry, what made them change names in a certain way, how would it make it more marketable, say, to the American audience as opposed to the British one and those worldwide. But yeah, it's so exciting. So those are my 23 books. I'll take a look-see and double check how many I actually have read before and how many I haven't, because I feel like that would just be a really interesting statistic to end off on. Here are all the books that I have read before that I now own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 out of 23 books that I got for free that I'm so lucky to have are books that I've read. So that leaves off, 15 titles that I have never read before. Many of them are titles that I actually don't even own in my collection. A few of them I have like the old paperbacks or a few other editions of that title that I just haven't read, but most of them are ones that I definitely didn't own before. So it's so exciting. I'm just, my heart is so big at the moment. So I'm really happy. And that is a very rare book haul with Leandra the TBR0. From my memory, I've never done a book haul on this channel before. If I have, it was definitely not as large as 23 books. I do have to just emphasize how grateful I am, especially to the previous owner, for taking such good care of her collection. You saw how pristine these editions are, all white edges, and I really hope that I can just follow in her footsteps and treat these books as respectfully as she did. Another little tidbit that I personally love that some collectors might not necessarily like, because technically these books aren't in pristine like new condition, is that she ended up writing her name, the previous owner, and the date of when these books ended up arriving in the mail. I'm assuming she was a part of some type of subscription service back in the 80s, because this particular book, Partners in Crime, one of my favorites, it apparently arrived on December 24th, 1984. So this was a Christmas Eve surprise for her in the mail, and I just think that's so sweet. And it just adds a little bit more character to this collection that is now under my charge. I now must take care of them, and I am very much up to the task. If you end up enjoying this video, if you're interested to see me gradually get through these lovely new books that are a part of my own library, then consider subscribing, like the video, and let me know in the comments which of these I should start with, which ones were your favorites, or if you've never read Agatha Christie before, let me know so I can give you some great beginner recommendations. Until the next video though, I hope you all are having a lovely day, that you are spending time with some self-care, making sure you're taking care of yourself, hydrating, eating, all of that good stuff, get 8 hours of sleep, and yeah, I hope to see you next time. Bye!